But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. So he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. Now God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed you food and your drink. If he should see you in the poorer condition than the other young men of your own age, you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel asked the guard, whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearances of the young men who eat the royal rations and deal with your servants according to what you observe. So he agreed to this proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. The word of God. Please be seated. What an inspiring passage. They chose vegetables. They chose vegetables. Wow. If I could find out the secret of how making that work, that would be great in my house. When I think of Adventism, and I think for most Christians, when they think about us as a people group, as they think of us as a denomination, the first thing that would come to their mind would be that we are vegetarians. Absolutely. Probably the top 2 is probably people who keep a different day than we do, and secondly, we are vegetarians. I just think it's so funny. I get the beautiful honor of teaching Intro to Adventism here once a quarter every year, and every time I teach this class, the first thing that they would characterize about us as Adventists, us as a Christian body, is that we are the people who do not eat meat. We are the people who likes tofu. And that, for me, is always interesting. Now, they don't necessarily get all the details. They don't really realize that we also abstain from substances of all kinds. They think that's a general Christian thing to do, but they don't realize that's actually a part of our life rhythm, that we abstain from these things. They just know that we as Adventist people don't have fun while we eat. You know, oftentimes when we think about Daniel, Daniel is kind of the epitome of the Christian Adventist temperance model. When we think of Daniel, he's the one that we use as a defense of how we ought to live, and see how he does it. When him and his boys were done, they were thicker, they were in better condition, their minds were sharper. That's why we keep these temperance practices alive in Adventism. We use Daniel a lot. So before I get into the actual Daniel story, I want to talk about another story. This is the story of the origin of the health message in Adventism, which started off in the 19th century. A lot of times when we talk about our church, we talk about our church as if it was born in a vacuum, like there was no history around it. We just came about, God spoke, and these things happened. But in actuality, as a church, we were birthed and we grew up around a country that was growing up and trying to figure out how to grow up. So during these times, in the 1800s, there was the temperance society had started. This is not an Adventist movement. This is a movement across the nation. The idea of living a more tempered life to have more moderation, to put away some things because of the challenges it was creating in our nation as a whole. Our whole nation was completely depleted as a place of non-sobriety. Here's an example of it. In our world today, we still wrestle with and have challenges around the issues of alcoholism and abuse and tragedies. But the average American in our world today takes in over the year about 2.5 gallons of alcohol. That's pure alcohol. That's not adding water and ingredients and preservatives. It's just if we just pulled it all the way down to the purest form, it would be about 2.5 gallons of alcohol a year. In 1830, it was 17.1 gallons. That's a lot of alcohol. And it wasn't just at a certain age. Children were being exposed to it. Oftentimes, parents would give it to their kids, and there would be rum, and when the rum runs out, there's whiskey. And our society in general felt the weight and the depletion of our moral obligations, and there was much abuse and neglect that was happening in our world. So was birthed this movement of being trying to wield back all of this heavy abuse and brokenness. We see the temperance movement beginning to take off and find feet and find voice. Now, the temperance movement started to gather strength as the Adventist church was being born. We as a church were not a solidified organization until 1863, but we know that the first iteration of us, the Millerites, came about, and then we had a great disappointment, and so we're still growing into who we are. But most of our leaders in the church were abolitionists. So we were against slavery, and we were speaking up against it in different ways, and between each other, and educating. And as this trajectory continues to go on, it really is taken up and championed by women of our society in the time, and groups and churches. These were the three main components of the temperance movement. Well, it just so happens that we were starting to be birthed into this church idea, and our face-fronting visionary leader was female. And so we begin to see how this galvanizes abolitionists and women from the women's suffrage movement, because that's coming along in our country as well, right? Women's rights, women's suffrage movement is starting to take place and coalesce. Abolitionists recognized in the alcohol pandemic and epidemic that we had, that there was a parallel abuse that was happening in slavery as there was in alcohol abuse and the problems in our nation. And so it was natural for them to take that turn and move towards it. And then women who happened to not have much of a voice as they were fighting for that also realized that alcohol abuse affected men, who then came home and affected the home, children and wives. And so you could see why churches and women championed the temperance movement. Well, as they began to get moving and get going, and things were starting to collaborate, and the church was even starting to think about these things, we come across the Civil War, 1861, so everything went on pause because there was a war in our country. And that became primary, and we started to focus on that. And soon enough, as it passed, the temperance movement started up again, and activist women rose to action. This is where we start to see female figures really take public form and format. Susan B. Anthony, Eliza Thompson, Frances Willard, these great big activist female names. Women were starting to take the forefront of speaking up, and this was post-Civil War. So this is like 1863, 1865, 1878, 1874, and it started moving. And guess what happens at 1863? Ellen G. White's voice speaks up again. She has her first vision about health. Notice how the church is growing right alongside the world that it's in. Post-Civil War, strength starts to coalesce. Temperance is becoming a big issue again. Women activists are making a stand. And in 1863, our own Ellen G. White has her first vision. We see the strong rise and push of the women to reform. Just look at this campaign ad. This is a real one here. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. Now, one may question the validity of anyone wanting to do that to these beautiful ladies, but one cannot question their drive to make it clear we are about standing up for certain issues. The temperance movement took place and began to take birth. We see then 1864, 1865, Ellen G. White starts writing about these things, and she starts talking up against alcohol and tobacco, and then unclean meats, and then she begins to talk about foods and the importance of hygiene and making sure you're clean, and showers and air and fresh air and sleep, and all of this begins to flourish to the top as one of our main values as Adventists in the church. The problem is, the Adventist church, who did not grow up in a vacuum, was still trying to find our voice. We were radical pacifists. We were abolitionists. We were holistic health specialists. We were present truth people who could see that God is moving in the front and the world is changing, and that we were going to come running after whatever God is opening to our eyes. And so we were constantly leaning forward, trying to find our voice. And when we landed this temperance idea, when we got a hold of this health message, it started to bud into our world and into our culture. And then what happens is we started to use it as a litmus test of holiness. And that's where it becomes a little gray. Because now I'm looking at you and you're looking at me to decide whether we are good enough for God to love us. Did you eat the right thing today? Did you know that in Ellen G. White's time, they even debated whether she had a closet addiction to meat? Was she eating that and unclean meats as well? Was she eating that behind closed doors? This is what happens to us when we take great, beautiful, strong ideas that are good for us and the world, and we turn it into the litmus test of righteousness. We begin to tear each other down. We still do it today. We still do it today. We look at each other's foods, and we try not to judge, but our eyes furrow a little bit, our eyebrows. What is that? It's pizza. What's on the pizza? Oh, that's veggie meat. Well, it smells like pepperoni. Well, how do you know what pepperoni smells like? The church gathers this new sense of holy hierarchy because we know how to live life. We know what to abstain from, and we have the self-control given by God, God's gift of strength to me to keep from doing these things. And anyone who does do these things, well, they better be unsure if they're saved or not. They better be coming to Christ every day. And then, because the Adventist world is so familiar with Daniel, we spent a ton of time in Daniel pre-1844, that we just fell right into chapter 1, right there into the Daniel story. And it made so much sense to us that this Daniel and his choices of not drinking and eating vegetables, well, obviously, that is the health message before the health message. And so we teach it. We teach Daniel as a model of abstinence and righteousness and individual moralism. And maybe so. But also, maybe there's something more to this story that allows us to live fuller Adventist lives. What was Daniel all about in this reading of chapter 1, verse Daniel. Okay, here's what I don't think it was about. Daniel didn't do it to be superior to others. Daniel didn't do it in order to gain favor with God so that God would save Daniel for that eternal someday promised land. God didn't do it to be the top physical condition in his slave caste. I don't think that's why Daniel was doing it. I think that he did it mostly as a faithful distinctiveness from those he's with. Remember, they had just gotten pummeled. They're all moving into exile. They're being imprisoned, and the king, as often happens in these primitive Middle East world functions, they would take the best of that particular group of people, and they would bring them in, and then they would try to acclimate them into their culture, because the king knows, if I get the smartest of each culture that I dominate, I become stronger as majestic king, right, in my kingship. And so Daniel and his friends happened to be that. That's why they got chosen. They were seen as bright and strong and young, and so they pulled them into this, but their people have just been pummeled. They are slaves. And so think about the emotional upheaval that Daniel and the boys had to go through, looking at those who had just torn their world apart and asking themselves, how might I serve in this place and still protest that the God of Zion is still God, even in the rubble? So Daniel makes this move as a faithful distinctiveness from his masters that he is now with. At the core of the Jewish understanding is the conviction that one can live fully, joyfully, healthfully, meaningfully, without surrendering the practices and values that define one's covenantal identity. I can live in this place and I can still find joy. I can struggle through the rubble and have hope. I can be in dire times and know that the God of Zion still reigns on high. The lesson for us, I think, in this story is profoundly beautiful, that we can live in places where things are not right and good and still have hope that the God in Zion reigns. And that we can still do good things even if we don't have the agency of some high office somewhere. Remember, Daniel here is of the lowest office. And Daniel and his friends will eventually make a huge difference in this time and era. So, Daniel and his friends are not withdrawing from the scenario. They're not running or acting elitist or separatist. They're not protecting purity for purity's sake. Instead, they're choosing a distinct rhythm of life that keeps them grounded while fully participating in the world around them. We weren't called to run away from this world. We were called to be a part of this world, to work in it, to be a part of its coming and its going, and in so doing, stay grounded in the covenantal identity that God is our God and calls us to live with integrity. This is not about avoiding bad things. Bad things happen to all of us. It is about preserving what gives life, what gives purpose, and what gives coherence. It is not about not having, it's about living out life more fully. We remain faithful not by hiding from the world, but by carrying the covenant into the world and flourishing there. The story mirrors another story in a few chapters down. You know this story quite as well. It's the one of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're at the furnace. They neither, does Daniel in this story, have much agency. They are part of the system. They're servants. They're administering from their abilities. And when Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, you must bow down, in graciousness, they say, we can't do that, king. It's not what we were called to do. And the king says, if you don't, you have to go into the fiery furnace. And they say, do with us what you will. God is with us. But if God doesn't save us, we still won't worship. It's the idea that they want to live fully into their covenantal integrity with God. Fully. They want to live in that joy and in that goodness. They want to live in all of its abundance, regardless of where the world around them tries to conform them towards. The story mirrors it. It's an act of protest, not hiding who they are, but carrying themselves into the furnace with generosity and kindness. They did not fight. They did not argue. They did not bicker. They did not rise up a coup. They moved into the furnace with generosity and kindness. And the beautiful point of the story is that God honored their generosity and kindness. We don't have to be adversarial to champion advocacy. We don't have to be adversarial to champion advocacy. Gentleness and kindness is not synonymous with weakness. Church, say amen. Gentleness and kindness is not synonymous with weakness. You and I can be kind and caring as well as sharp and discerning, cutting through what is diminishing life around us. We can do both things. We can be clear about the values that bring life and that fill us with goodness, and also be kind as we advocate that life towards others, whether justice or peace or goodness. So this story ends not with, look what Daniel achieved. That wasn't the point of the story at all. In Daniel chapter 1, it's not Daniel who gets the kudos. These four youth, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, God gave knowledge and skill and insight. Here, the Jewish heart of the narrative shines brightly. Human efforts matters, daily choices matter, practices matter, but flourishing is ultimately God's work. Flourishing is ultimately God's work. This is not mediocrity. It's a partnership. It is where the divine and humanity meets to live out good, beautiful ways. Daniel's faithful choices create space in his life for God's gift to land. His wisdom is received, not manufactured. His clarity, his insight, his understanding, all emerge in a relationship between Daniel's agency and God's supremacy. Together, that intersection brings life and goodness. In this reading, grace does not replace human effort. It completes it. Human effort does not earn grace, it opens room for it. Living fully happens at that intersection where our choices and God's generosity meets. So this is the opposite of the Prohibition era model. This looks different from that. It's not the be pure and God will reward you. It is live in ways that nourish your soul and God will meet you there. It is not about the do's and the don'ts. I think the best way that we can live out our Adventism in our Christianity as a whole together is that we live graciously towards the world around us. My dad is a gardener, phenomenal gardener. And so he has a lot of clients. I've told you before, the clients love my dad. One day, my dad picked me up from school and we went to work. And as we're driving around, my dad makes a turn and beer cans roll out from underneath the chair of our truck. And I was like, dang, Dad, you have something to tell the rest of us? are you even Adventist? I pull up these Coors Light cans. I was like, Dad. He says, yes. And I held them out, full cans. I said, can we talk? What is this? My dad says, oh. He says, yeah, I was at one of our clients' house, and they saw me working, and they said, hey, you're working hard. Here's some beers. And as a young kid, I said, Dad, did you tell them about the health message? Did you tell them they're in trouble with God? He says, no. Don't you think God loves them? Yeah, I do, but also, they're drinking. And he says, no. My job is to love them and do the best I can to take care of their place and let God do the work between us. I said, wow, can I drink these? I didn't say that. Don't start rumors about me. I didn't say that. What does it look like for Adventists to live graciously and generously and kindly into this world? To be able to see others as human beings, to share the beauty of what makes our covenantal integrity so wonderful, and also to not bear the weight of judging others or ourselves, to allow God's grace in his fullness to pour over each of us. This is not about don't drink or you'll be defiled. Don't eat that piece of whatever or you'll be defiled. Don't drink coffee or tea or eat the spicy peppers or you'll be defiled. This is about make life-giving choices that align with who you are, even in environments that pressure you to conform. This is about living it out fully. I love the Adventist Church for this. The Adventist Church, in the way that it invests, does its best to do research and make sure that everything that they're investing in does not have any ties to companies that encourage or advertise or solicit or use substances like alcohol or tobacco. And I think why that's beautiful, I think it's a generous way of saying this world still runs on those kinds of things. We see it in advertisements, we see it in commercials, it's all over the place. But that as a people, our generous, kind protest is that we're not gonna buy into that. That we're not judging you for it, but for us, we're gonna live fully the way that we live today. And I don't need to sell anyone on the health message. You just look at our congregation, look at Loma Linda. We have the highest population of, what do they call them, centrists? Is that what it's called, Dr. Brand? Is that what it is? Centenarians. See, I knew I could ask Dr. Brand even though. Dr. Montshiller would have known as well too, of course. I mean, we don't need to prove that. It's already true. What we do need to prove is that while we live this long, God's grace lives in us. That God's grace moves through us. Ben Amoa wrote this in his section of the edition. God cares about us in every aspect of our lives, and while God may not be nitpicking the specifics, God guides us to seek balance, autonomy, and health, not just for ourselves, but for others. So the Daniel reading today is not moralistic nor legalistic. It's not rooted in fear, not about controlling bodies, not about moral superiority. It's about wholeness, flourishing, and identity under pressure. My daughter said to me, Dad, what's up with the meat thing? And she's right. I'm vegetarian, but I look like not a vegetarian. Like how people look at me be like, what vegetation are you eating? Like, good night. How many calories is in that broccoli you eating up there? She says, I want to be a vegetarian. Do you think I can do it? I said, I believe you can do it. She says, how much do you believe? I said, I'll pay you $200 if you become a vegetarian for a whole year. She's like, done. Later that day, while she's eating her chicken nuggets. She says, wait, let me finish the meat in our fridge, and then I'll start being a vegetarian. I said, cool, no problem. Dad, what if I marry somebody who doesn't want to go to church on Sabbath? What if I marry somebody who doesn't, eat the way we eat? Will you hate them? Yes. Of course I wouldn't hate them. She says, well, why do you make us do it? I said, those things are not going to save you for the someday, but those things are practices that help your character grow, that help you be healthier today. They should be a part of your rhythm because it makes you just feel and live better. And one day when you marry someone, I hope, all hopes, that they'll be vegetarians, even if they're thick vegetarians like me. And I hope one day you get married that person loves the Sabbath like we love the Sabbath because it's so meaningful. But if that one day you marry someone and they just love Jesus, they love their family, and they find in their heart some way to love your family too, I will be profoundly grateful. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing about being Adventist is that we love Jesus and that we recognize in our practices and the way that we live that indeed Jesus loves us. And in that graciousness, Jesus can care for the world better. So when you leave today into the rain, I pray that you live fully into God's grace. Find habits and practices that are good for you because they're good for you. Be a better vegetarian than me. Drink water, sleep more, get exercise, move away from substances, get counseling, make friends, take walks, get rest, slow down, and feel the presence of God on your shoulders. To know that God absolutely and infinitely loves you. And if you do that, you will live the fullest life any Adventist can live.